Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Claire Elliott, as you can see on the screen here. I am the daughter of D.B. Cooper. It was just the other day, just last week, in fact, I think 9/11, which actually technically is this week, that I finally remember that my father is D.B. Cooper. Yeah, he was the Zodiac killer too. And I know you don't know about him because I am considered top secret and have been since I was 9 years old, and everything related to me and connected to me is also top secret as the result. And I'm going to go ahead and watch the final hunt for D.B. Cooper, which caught my attention, hosted by Laurence Fishburne. And that was what first triggered my serious consideration to finally remember some details that confirmed for me that yes, indeed, my father was D.B. Cooper. I guess I should start by showing you the FBI sketch, which is different from the sketch that is so commonly known. Here he is. It looks more like my father. This is a 1972 FBI composite drawing of Dan Cooper. Dan, I guess that was the name that he was supposed to have. It's 53 years ago, November 24th, 1971. Wikipedia. If you want to contribute to Wikipedia, they want to stay free, and if you could donate to them, it'd be great. Okay, they're telling me to donate, but I have no money in my bank account right now. So if you do, please donate to them. They only are asking me for $2.75, which is amazing. Okay, this is the original sketch here that I guess they released at the time. This is the FBI wanted poster of D.B. Cooper, and it doesn't look very much like my father at all. It was a long time ago. I don't know, at some point over the years, over recent years, I'll say, somebody said something somewhere in the media. They connected D.B. Cooper to Zodiac. Okay, my father is the Zodiac killer. I know you don't know that. You've never heard of me. I'm top secret, okay? That's why you haven't heard of me, okay? I'd heard of this D.B. Cooper guy vaguely. It never really captured my attention until somebody connected it to the Zodiac killer, because I guess it happened in the California area, and it happened right after the Zodiac killings, right after that Zodiac killer spree, right, in the late 60s. So it makes sense. And when somebody mentioned that in the media, I don't know who it was just a brief mention. I decided to look at it more carefully because that was something I had become aware of. I did notice the similarity, the mystery, the drama that seemed very much like Zodiac. And I was like, oh, who the hell is that? It does really remind me of my father, but I just didn't think so. I think I looked at it at that time, and the guy is supposed to be in his 40s, and my father was 30 years old in 1971. His birthday is July 13, so he would have been 30 years old. This happened at the end of the year, so he would have been like over 30 years old. At the time, he was working on his MBA at Harvard Business School. We had moved away from California that same year in June and had traveled cross country with a U-Haul trailer in our olive wood-sided family wagon. Is that what they call them? Station wagon. Wasn't it a station wagon? Yeah. And it was me, my younger brother, our dog in the back. We had a little cubby hole. You know, everything was stuffed in the car, and our parents in front who took turns driving. And, the first stop was Iowa because that's where my father was from, to visit his parents, his family, and we stayed there for a time. And then the second stop was my grandma here in New York State. I have recently moved to the area. I live in Hornell, New York, and I grew up visiting my grandmother in Wellsville, New York, which is about 30 minutes from here. We have family history in both towns. And then by the time we got going and got to our destination in Lexington, Massachusetts, where I lived for about a year and a half, I was 2 weeks late for kindergarten. I don't know how. I mean, we had the whole summer to travel cross country in our U-Haul and station wagon, and I was still 2 weeks late for my kindergarten class. That was always the story of my life. Well, that wasn't the story every year. Usually we moved during winter break. I began my first grade year in Lexington And then I finished the year starting after winter break in Old Greenwich, Connecticut. And the same thing happened in 1976. I began the year in Old Greenwich, Connecticut and finished the year in Princeton, New Jersey. And then we didn't move again. I was I was right in the middle of 5th grade, and I had the privilege of attending middle school and high school in one place. And I think that was very important to everybody, not my immediate family, but other people who were causing us to move around a lot. They thought it would be good if I stayed in one place for my middle school and high school years. And I'm really grateful for at least that much, because I identify more with Princeton, New Jersey than I do with either Old Greenwich, Connecticut or Lexington, Massachusetts. That's my hometown. That's where I came from. Yeah, if I had moved around a lot, it wouldn't really feel like I had a hometown. But anyway, yeah, my father was right in the middle. He had just started his MBA, studying for his MBA at Harvard, in September of 1971, making me 2 weeks late for my kindergarten class. And money was tight in Lexington. My parents had sold our house in Palo Alto, which was a very exclusive area. And, the property values have gone through the roof. And, since then, that is the most expensive house I guess I ever lived in. It's now worth over $2 million. It's not a very huge house. It's a nice house, but it's a ranch. It's not a big colonial house or anything. It's like it's worth the most of any of the houses I lived in growing up. And I lived in some nice houses, and I didn't consider that to be the nicest house I lived in, but because of its location in Palo Alto, it's worth the most, I guess, property wise. Like I told you, this is the original sketch, but this is the sketch that was released by the FBI. And it doesn't look anything like him. I like the original sketch. Let's just look at it. That does not look like the same person as this sketch. And they made his skin pretty dark. The ears look semi right. This guy is my father, but this sketch does not look exactly like my father. And I know that the FBI knew who it really was. And the thing about my father is that he had a contract with our government. The contract guaranteed that any crime that he committed, he would get away with. He would die before they weren't permitted to catch him. My father was a CIA operative who was a hitman. He was a hitman for the CIA. And this was the contract he had with the US government. He was untouchable. And this is why he created the Zodiac. And this is why he did the DB Cooper thing. And let me show you a picture of my father. I'm going to show you a picture of him when he's very young. This is his senior picture in high school right here. And that's him without his glasses. He always wore glasses. He started having trouble seeing the blackboard in 7th grade or 6th grade or something. That's how I remember it. I don't believe he could see without his glasses. He's like my husband. My husband has that kind of vision, even though my husband started wearing glasses when he was 2 years old, or 3. I think it was 3. Let me show you another picture. This is a more modern day picture. I don't want to make it too big, and I'll make it a little bigger. It gets kind of pixelized as I make it bigger, though. It was a tiny little picture. It's a nice picture of him. He looks nice there. He was quite a bit younger, and I'm going to show you an older picture of him just not long before he died. Of course, here we go. Here he is. Nobody in my family cares to tell me anything. And I didn't even know my father was dead for 2 years until I stumbled upon his obituary online. And this photo was on his obituary. And this was the first time I ever saw my father with white hair in my life. It was his obituary photo. That was the first time I had ever seen my father with white hair. But yeah, he's always had glasses. His senior picture, they made him take off his glasses, but he wouldn't have been able to see without his glasses. I guess that was just a thing at his high school. This is DB Cooper. Why do I think he's DB Cooper? Well, first of all, when I first heard and I looked into it very briefly, I just immediately dismissed it when I found out the guy was in his 40s and he looked like that original sketch that I showed you earlier. It didn't look anything like my father. The Zodiac looks more like my father than this sketch does. And, the way they describe him, he had very dark hair, dark brown, almost black hair, and his skin color, it led them to believe that he could have been Latino or something. He had an olive complexion, a kind of darker complexion. And my father father, as you can see, he was more olive complected than than me, my brother, or my mother. He tanned better, in the sun than we did, but he had white skin. He was light in appearance. I mean, he does look like he has more color in these photos than maybe some people would have. I mean, at the time of this photo that you see on the screen, he was living in North Carolina. It looks like he's at a restaurant there, and it was like snapped by one of his children. I always think it's my youngest sibling that snapped this photo. Yeah, he was a white guy. He did not look Latino. He could pass for being Jewish, maybe, but he had very dark eyes. Yes, so that much is the case. And his nose is much wider than any of the sketches portray. But you notice here, I'm going to just switch this for a moment. You notice how the FBI sketch kind of widened the nose a little bit to kind of make it similar. The original sketch does not really portray a very wide nose, and his face is longer. But when people are in a state of trauma, it's hard. You see how square his forehead is. It's very much like my father. Let's just go back to his high school picture. He had a very square forehead. This is him very young. I guess he would have been 17 years old in this photo. He had a very square kind of forehead. So why do I think I know this is the question that everybody has right now. Why? Why do I say that it's my father? I mean, I'm not making this up. Okay. Well, when I looked into it superficially, on the surface, it just didn't seem like it could be my father, and I just dismissed it and didn't look into it any further. Yes, all of the mystery and intrigue, it reminded me of my father, the Zodiac killer. But I'm like, no, he just doesn't fit the description. It can't be him. And I wasn't really interested in it if it wasn't my father. It was an interesting story, yes, but I'm just not really into aviation, or I'm not always into mysteries. I like mystery. I really like it when it's about my family and, my father. That's when I really am interested. Okay. And I just thought this was not him. But then the other day, Mr. Laurence Fishburne came upon our TV. My husband clicked on this. It took me a while to find this. I didn't know where he had seen this. Spent like an hour preparing these web pages. I couldn't find Laurence Fishburne's It's History's Greatest Mysteries that he hosted. And it's only episode 1 that is the final hunt for DB Cooper. I put in the final hunt for DB Cooper on all the platforms, and I couldn't find it. It wasn't until I put History's Greatest Mysteries in, which is, I guess it was a 4-season documentary by A&E, that I finally found it. I guess every platform has a special on DB Cooper. I mean, Netflix has theirs, and that one's like a 4-parter. And there's one on Prime, and there's a couple on Prime. There's a couple movies about DB Cooper. This is the only unsolved case in aviation history, apparently. And I'd like to play the trailer. I think I'm allowed to play the trailer. Yeah, there's not a trailer. Okay, well, I'm going to watch this, and I'm going to give you my reaction. Oh, let me give you the backstory. I'm sorry. Okay, so it was Laurence Fishburne. I was born into a very unusual family, a CIA family, and I was born into a lot of money, which I still have no access to. I'm 59 years old, almost 60 years old. I turn 60 next month on October 21st. That's getting close to a month away. And I still don't have my money, my assets, nothing. I was allowed to develop a lot of businesses, co-write films, music, videos, films, everything. I did a lot. I was allowed to do a lot when I was a child. It was like I fit a whole lifetime or a couple lifetimes into my childhood, and then the rest of my life has been pretty dead and uneventful. And it's been pretty miserable. I didn't always remember everything. They didn't want me to, but I was able to remember at least some very important things. And it's torture to remember all of this stuff and not have everything that I was promised and dreamt about since I was a baby, because I was promised a good life one day. And it's very sad for me to see so many people, so many adults. I was a child and they take credit for my work, and everybody gets paid. My money is distributed to all my relatives throughout the world and people I don't even know. And I don't get anything. I don't get one penny myself. And it's my money and it's solely my money. It's very frustrating. But anyway, a lot of the films I co-wrote, I was a producer on, and I helped to select the actors who starred in my movies. And one of the wonderful stars who starred in The Matrix, that is one of my movies that I co-wrote. One of these wonderful actors is Laurence Fishburne. He's a wonderful actor. I probably produced some other films or co-wrote some other films he was in. We used our actor, the actors we liked and selected, we used more than once usually. So I'm sure this is not the only movie I co-wrote and co-produced that starred or at least had Laurence Fishburne in it. And it was Laurence in the trailer, which I can't find right now. I mean, I'm going to have to look around and see if I can find a trailer here before we're through here, because I can play the trailer and I would like to. It was that trailer that captured my attention. The way Laurence is just so spectacular in the way he presents anything and everything, and it just captured me. And because it was Laurence Fishburne, I thought, oh my goodness, Laurence Fishburne does not host very many shows. He doesn't have to if he doesn't want to. He hosted this because it was important and because it's about my family, and he captured my interest enough for me to think about, is DB Cooper my dad? And I thought about it, and I finally remembered. And this is what I remembered. I had to think about November, I guess it's 24th, 1971. Now, mind you, throughout the summer of 1971, we were traveling cross country in our station wagon and a U-Haul trailer out and back. I was 2 weeks late for my kindergarten year at Mariah Hastings Elementary School in Lexington, Massachusetts. My parents had sold our house in Palo Alto, and I explained that the property values were not quite as high as they are today. So they didn't get millions of dollars for our house, but they had a little, they had a little something. I'm sure they had a mortgage, so it probably wasn't a lot of something. And money was tight because this time my dad did not want to work. My dad, I'm talking about Dennis Wayne Elliott, my father. He had gotten his master's at Stanford. He was working for Sylvania as an engineer. Engineering was brand new back then. It was a brand new subject. He had majored in engineering at the University of Iowa. It was a really hot topic back then. And then he got a job at Sylvania. We lived in Los Altos at the time. My parents met when they lived in a big building in Mountain View, California. And that's where I was born, in Mountain View. But as a family, when they got married, they rented a house in Los Altos, and that's where I lived for the first 2.5 years of my life until we moved to Palo Alto, and they bought the house in Palo Alto. And it was right before my younger brother Mark was born, and at the time my father was working for Sylvania as an engineer, and Sylvania paid for his master's at Stanford, but it took him forever because he was working full time. I don't know how many years it took him, but mind you, in 1971 he was 30 years old. So he had finished his bachelor's on time. He had gone straight from high school, gone to 4 years of college, gotten his bachelor's. So he was 21 years old when he graduated. So it was 62 when he graduated and got his bachelor's. And I know he might have worked for a couple of people, but Sylvania was what he settled into for a long time. It wasn't his first job, but it was one of the first, and they put him through Stanford. They paid for his education. I mean, amazing. And he got his master's. So let's say it was maybe 3 years later when he was 24. So maybe it took him 5 years or something, or to him it took forever, and he didn't want to ever do that again. He left Sylvania right after that. He got accepted to Harvard Business School. He wasn't going to stick with Sylvania. He was pissed at Sylvania because they made him work full time, and it took him so long to get his master's. And so he didn't feel obligated to stay at Sylvania once his master's was complete, and he immediately started applying to Harvard Business School and got accepted, and we traveled cross country so he could begin in the fall of 1971. He had just finished his master's at that time. He must have applied that previous fall, the fall of 70, and got accepted in the spring or something, and then we left in that spring of 71. So yeah, he didn't feel any obligations towards Sylvania. In fact, he was pissed at them. And my little dog is dreaming. She's making noises because she's having a dream, and I think she's trying to bark at something in her dream, and it's coming out funny. All right, Lily. You okay, Lily? practical girl. So when we get to Lexington, Massachusetts, all my parents have is the money from the house that they sold and any savings. It wasn't a lot because I know they had a mortgage. We had only lived in that house for a couple years. They didn't have much money left over. So it was tight. It was really tight financially. And I just remember, accidentally knocking over my milk and my mother freaking out and making me take a spoon and spoon it back into my cup on the floor. I got on my hands and knees and had to spoon up my milk to put it back in my cup so we wouldn't waste the milk. I remember them making me understand, I had a younger brother too, but he was very young, but it was me, the older one, who needed to understand that we had to turn off lights because if we didn't, we wouldn't be able to afford our bills and then we'd be homeless and out on the street. They really scared me a lot. It was really traumatic for me, thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to be homeless on the streets. I remember hearing that and being obsessed with turning off lights all the time because I didn't want us to be on the street. And I was so scared of that. I was starting my kindergarten year in 1971, and it was in the middle of my first grade year, the following year, that my father finished up his MBA in record time, a year and a half, end of 1972. And then we moved to Old Greenwich, Connecticut after that. But it was very, very stressful. We lived in a tiny house in Lexington, Massachusetts. We rented it. It was the only time as a child that I ever tasted what it was like to be poor. We lived in a middle-class neighborhood, but it was an exclusive town. Everybody around us was not poor. We didn't come off looking poor at all. We didn't have the reputation of being poor or anything, but we felt poor because never had money been so tight for us. So my father was very motivated. He didn't want to work so he could finish his MBA really fast and be done with it. He didn't want to go through, I don't know how many years it was, but I'm thinking it must have been like 5 or 6 years that he was studying to get his master's, and he did not want to ever do that again. So it was only a year and a half for his MBA. So he had just started in September, and on November 24th, it was the day before Thanksgiving. We would always go to my grandma's house on Thanksgiving. This would have been the first Thanksgiving we had ever spent at my grandma's here in New York State. We had never been able to visit her prior to our long distance journey to move to Lexington, Massachusetts. So this would have been the first Thanksgiving that we would have visited my grandma Flanagan in Wellsville, New York. I don't know how many hours. It was 4 hours. It was a 4-hour road trip, I think. Massachusetts is not that far from this part of New York State. Most of the journey is through New York State because it's pretty wide. And this is like Western New York State. And we're this kind of the south part next to the border to Pennsylvania, near to Canada. The reason I kind of dismissed it too, when I looked at the dates and everything, in my mind, when I don't really look carefully, my father never missed a holiday. I didn't remember it at first thought. It would have been Thanksgiving. All of us were always at grandma's house. No, just dismissed it. But as I gave it more thought this time in 2025, I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, there was one Thanksgiving my father was late for. And I'm like, was it that one? In 1971, by Thanksgiving, I was 6 years old. As you know, I was in kindergarten. And yes, there was one Thanksgiving my father was late for. And he got back in time it was nighttime when he finally got there. And it was not on Thanksgiving. He missed Thanksgiving, but it was nighttime when he had arrived. Okay. And my mother was really delighted that he even made it. He wasn't that late. It was a big deal that he wasn't making it for Thanksgiving, but she was so grateful when he finally made it. She was grateful that it didn't take like a week before he could show up. He showed up like the next night, the night after Thanksgiving. And I remember her talking. It's funny. This is something I didn't share with my husband because it hadn't really surfaced yet. It's been a couple days. And I remember my mother talking with my father's boss or somebody related. He wasn't working, but he was connected to the government, and my mother knew that, and she was very proud of this. She thought he was really going places, and she was really thinking there was a lot of money on the way for us, and she was willing to sacrifice for the future of our family as the result. There was somebody related to, I guess, his government work. I guess you could say it's like side work. It wasn't a job. job. He didn't have an official job. It was, it was undercover top secret work. But my mother just, it was kind of like on the side, and they talked about it like it was on the side, and it was really important work. And my mother was very proud that my father was doing it. And she was talking to one of his associates, I guess, on the phone or somewhere. I remember this. And she said, "Oh, I'm so grateful that you got him home as soon as you did." She didn't know what he was doing. I just remember the uncomfortable silence. It was clear to me, even as I was 6 years old, it was clear that the person didn't want to react for some reason. They remained silent, and it was uncomfortable because he should have made it in time for Thanksgiving. It was clear to me. But my mother was kind of like in her denial, and, "Oh, I'm so grateful you got him home as soon as you did, because, it would have been sad if he had not made any of the holiday, but he at least got back the next day, and we're so grateful." And yeah, it was clear that he was supposed to make it in time for Thanksgiving, and the person didn't want to say anything to her. So this man that my father, his associate, and I remember that, and maybe my mother noticed the reaction. Maybe this is why realized it, because I think it was on the phone, and my mother was questioning my father and saying, "He acted so weird, and what were you doing? And you were supposed to be back in time, weren't you?" Or something. They had an argument about it. I think that's why I had that realization as a 6-year-old. Oh, so he was supposed to make it in time, but he might have said something accidentally and then my mother was reacting to that, and then he didn't say anything, and she might have been questioning my father. And I remember when he came home and we were so happy. My mother was pleasantly surprised. She had thought he was going to miss the whole holiday. He had, driven to grandma's house and arrived the next night after Thanksgiving. And I remember asking my father, I said, "Hey, what took you so long? What were you doing?" And my father was quiet, and I guess he looked around to see if my mother was around. He said, "Well, I'll just say this. If you ever hear about a hijacking, just know it was me." And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" And he's like, "That's all I'm going to say." He was like, "Oh my God." And I think I might have said something to my mother. My mother's like, "What are you talking about?" Oh, and he wouldn't say a word again. And my mother was like, "Oh, he was just on his government business." And she's all pleased because that means money, she thinks. And, we were really short money at that time in our life. So yeah, she wanted him to make the money. But yeah, I was, that's the thing about me. When somebody pulls me aside and says that, I'm going to share it with people. I don't keep secrets. Yes, I can keep a secret if it's really important and it's for the protection of people. But yeah, when my father says something like that, I'm going to tell my mom, okay? And yeah, it probably but my mother was just so, happy that my father was doing his little thing, and he couldn't talk about his work, because it was top secret. She knew he was a CIA operative, I guess. She didn't tell me he was a CIA operative. Well, other people did, but my mother didn't tell me that. She didn't use those terms with me directly, but it was all hush hush, and she didn't want to know because, she was just happy he was doing important work, for the government, because money, money, money. But yeah, I think I weirded her out for a minute, and then she checked it out with him, and he wouldn't discuss anything with her. And then she thought, "Oh, Claire, you must have misunderstood." This is the way my mother was. She really could so easily go into denial if she chose to. And I'm like, "Yeah, but that's what he told me." It all took place in the evening. The flight was out of Portland, Oregon. And it's funny, my father ended up living in Portland, Oregon later on in life with his, before he got remarried and after he remarried, before and after he remarried. I was 18 when he moved there. He lived there for years until maybe the early 90s or something. And then they moved back to Virginia, Great Falls, Virginia. And then it was Connecticut, and, and then it was North Carolina. Yeah, this is a big breakthrough for me. I mean, I just didn't think it could be my father. But the thing about my father is he wore disguises. And I'm thinking the reason why the sketch image does not immediately resemble him is because he was wearing a disguise. And I believe he was on an assignment wearing that kind of disguise for some other purpose. And he used the disguise to hijack a plane. And he carefully planned it. And I went through it with Dean, my husband. I'm like, okay, how could he have done this? Okay, so the flight was out of Portland. He had, prior to this, mapped out where everything was. He found the woods, right? And outside Portland, he found a little town right outside the woods, or some place outside the woods, to park his rental car. When he hijacked this plane, they had to go back and get the money in Portland, right? And then they gave him the money, and then he told them to go to Mexico City, which he knew. He had researched the flight paths. This is my father. He had access to government information to find all this out. So he had a lot of help. He had a lot of resources at his fingertips. So he knew if he told them to go to Mexico City, it would put the plane right over this area of woods where he could jump out and drop the money and drop out. And then he could hike through the woods to the rental car he had parked. And I guess he had parked it there and then taken some kind of public transportation to the airport, right? Portland airport, whatever. And then he hijacked, and then he told them to go to Mexico City. And then he jumped out with the money and then hiked to his car. And he probably had a compass and all that. So he knew, what direction he had planned it all. My father was very meticulous. He would have planned every detail. And then he got in his rental car and he drove, I'm thinking, to Reno. That was a city nearby where he could fly. He wasn't going to go back to Portland because everybody would be looking for him there, right? So he had already planned where he was going to go and how he was going to get to Reno. He probably had an appointment in Reno. He'd probably been working out of Reno, for his assignment. So he had already mapped it all out, went to Reno and flew out of there to Boston. Flew to Boston. It would have been like a red eye possibly, and got to Boston, got off his plane. He had driven I don't know which car my mother drove to grandma's. We went with my mother alone to grandma's, apparently. Yeah, my mother got another car. They got another car. Our Datsun B210, we didn't get till we were in Old Greenwich, Connecticut. So in Lexington, I thought we only had one car. So maybe my mother took the station wagon. Maybe we were in the station wagon and he rented a car. It sounds like that's what it might have happened, because she didn't get her own car until we moved to Old Greenwich. So we went on our road trip to grandma's and he rented a car because he had a business trip. So he had a rental car for that. So that rental car was parked at Logan International. And by the way, one of his sons is named Logan. And he just got in his car. He drove home to Lexington, stashed the money. My husband, Dean, was very fascinated by this story growing up. He's more fascinated with this than he was with Zodiac. This particular D.B. Cooper ignited my husband's child imagination. He told me that one of the bags of money, he had to throw one bag down and the other bag he had on his body. And he left the other bag of money behind. I guess he didn't get it. I don't know. I think that was a real screw up. I'm sure that would have really pissed him off because it was $200,000. He only got away with $100,000 and the other bag was in the woods and they found it, I guess, is what my husband says, which my father would have considered that a big failure. He would have wanted more than $100,000. But from what I understand, $200,000 is the equivalent of $1.8 million today. So half of almost $3 million is like $1 million. I could live on $1 million for the rest of my life. So back then it was a lot more than it is today. And I guess that would have been okay. I know he would have been really pissed that he lost that bag, but it was either that or get caught. So he had to move fast. He didn't have time. I guess that was a screw up. He really screwed up losing that bag of money, but at least he had what he had, the other $100,000 it really was. And got in his car, drove to Reno, flew out, took a red eye to Boston, had his rental car at the airport, drove home to Lexington, stashed his money, and he had those parachutes. He had probably had a bunch of bags in the car. He wouldn't have ever never checked the money into luggage below. He would have carried that on to the plane. And in those days, they didn't really have nearly as good security as they do today. So he could have gotten away with a lot. He would have carried it on. And the parachutes, he would have put that in a suitcase and maybe checked that. He had to get rid of the parachutes, I would think. I mean, unless he left them behind. Did they ever find the parachutes? Because, I mean, that would have been like a lot to carry around. Maybe he left that in the woods. If he left the money, maybe he left the parachutes. I don't know. If he had to carry the parachutes, he would have put them in a bag and checked them and then brought them and stashed them somewhere or whatever. In Lexington, Massachusetts, at our house, probably would have put it in the closet. And then he got in the car and drove to grandma's, which was over 4 hours away, and got there the night after Thanksgiving. So that would mean he would have gotten home on Thanksgiving, maybe gone to sleep, and then woke up in the morning. Well, it wouldn't have been in the morning, because if it only took 4+ hours, he could have left in the afternoon. It was in the evening. It was like, I'm thinking like around 8 o'clock. It was dark, and it wasn't bedtime, but it was late enough that it was dark. So I'm thinking like 8 was when he got there. So he could have left in the afternoon the next day. And what was he doing? I don't know what he was doing. Well, the day after Thanksgiving, banks are open. And I don't remember what day of the week it was. I forget what I might have looked. I know I looked it up and I forget what day it was. Okay, November 24, 1971 was what day of the week? Wednesday. Okay, that was the day. And then Thursday's Thanksgiving. And then Friday, yeah. Let me see. Would banks have been closed the next day? Are banks closed for the weekend on the day after Thanksgiving? No, they reopened for regular business hours on the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday. Okay, so they were open. Banks were open. So that's what he would have been doing the day after Thanksgiving, because it would have taken him till he would have arrived back to our house on Thanksgiving, and he would have gone to sleep. You know, he would have been home, and then he would have gone to sleep. And then the next day he would have taken that money to put it in the bank, right? No. I figured this out with I told Dean that he wouldn't have put it in the bank. He would have put it in his safety deposit box, because my mother had a couple safety deposit box and my father had one. I remember my mother telling me he had a safety deposit box when we lived in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, and it was for his work. So that's where he stashed the cash, was in a safety deposit box, not an account. It was a safety deposit box. And that's what he would have been taking care of the day after Thanksgiving, which was a Friday, a business day. And he would have stashed it in a bank in Lexington. And then when we moved, he would have moved it over to Old Greenwich. I was asking Dean, how long do you think that would have he said it would have lasted a long time. It would have lasted a long time. It could have lasted till the 90s, After he got his MBA, he got a job with RCA American Communications, and we moved to Old Greenwich, Connecticut, and he commuted from Old Greenwich, Connecticut down to Manhattan, where, their headquarters, RCA American Communications. Yeah, I guess it was American Communications even then. And then they transferred him to Princeton, New Jersey, because they were building a new headquarters there. And we watched it be built, the Forrestal Center, from the ground up. When we moved in December of 1976, we were walking on the dirt. They were just laying the foundation. It was still all dirt at that time. So yeah, he probably had that money for a long time. And I guess that's how we got through that really tight time, that time when we didn't have a lot of money. He would have felt a lot of stress over not having very much money. My mother was very stressed. We were all really stressed, and that would have driven him to do such a thing. I know it would have. I mean, it sounds like he was doing government work, so I don't know what was so difficult, why he had to do something like this, other than he really got off on it. And yeah, it was a little extra cash. I mean, a lot of extra cash. And so that's the deal. That's how I know it's my father now. And yeah, he could have been wearing contact lenses because he wasn't able to see without his glasses, I don't think. And he could have been wearing contact lenses for his work. Like he had a disguise. He was doing something, some assignment, and he had a disguise because it doesn't seem like DB Cooper was wearing glasses most of the time. And it was sunglasses he put on at the end, is what I understand. So that would be the only way he could operate without glasses, is if he had contacts in. And the reason why his skin was darkened and his hair was different and he looked older was because it was a disguise. My father wore disguises, so that explains it. All right, now I'm going to watch The Final Hunt for DB Cooper, and I'm going to give you my reaction. I wish I could find this. Oh, here it is. Is this it? Oh, okay, this is the no, this is not the trailer. Oh, I wish I could find the trailer. Hi, Dean. I don't know how you saw the trailer, Dean. Okay, here it is. No, that's I am DB Cooper. I guess there are other people who are claiming to be DB Cooper, just like Zodiac. It's the same thing. Oh, let me read this. This is a review. Okay, DB Cooper incident. Let me share my screen. DB Cooper incident may be a U.S. cover-up for a federal employee. I have a long history with this matter because I was working in the Portland, Oregon, Montgomery Ward headquarters store as an investigator traveling all over Oregon and Washington doing audits of remote store accounts. A Susan Cooper worked in the mail order department, very nice and friendly. I went to her house by invitation once for, I believe, a Christmas dinner. I met her husband, Daniel Cooper, who worked for the USFS Gifford Pinchot National Forest directly in line with the flight of the jet plane and near the parachute drop. Daniel was a U.S. military veteran and smoked cigarettes, including going outside to smoke during our visit. Oh, he was supposed to smoke, wasn't he? My father didn't smoke, as far as I know. And these are the little details that always used to make me think, oh, no. But, maybe he did. He never smelled like smoke, and he always discouraged us from smoking, me and my brother. At work, not long after the event, I met Susan and asked her if she had heard of the news. She became grim and told me the FBI had already interviewed them. This is no lie. Forever after this, she was a total loner, head down, never smiling nor friendly, complete 1000% opposite of her former self. I left to attend law school in Salem, Oregon in 1973. When this topic gained more interest several years ago, I sent 3 emails to the FBI with this information. There should be plenty of records of DB in Washington, including DMV, banking, property, etc., etc. Finally, I got an email response from the FBI. How do you know he worked for the federal government? I replied, and never received response. My email account was shortly thereafter disconnected somehow. Cover-up is a strong possibility. Yeah, so there actually is a Cooper. My father, Dennis Wayne Elliott, he liked to frame people. He liked to point to people, and maybe he knew this guy, and maybe he did. Did he work for the government? As the Zodiac, my father tried to insinuate and leave clues and things that might lead people to think that these murders were somehow connected to the police officer on duty that night. And now that police officer's grandson is so convinced his grandpa is the Zodiac killer. It's such a joke. If you go and see Jay Foy on TikTok, he's so convinced. What a terrible thing to do to your grandfather. He's not here to defend himself anymore. He is so sure. I was my father's confidant as a little girl, and the Zodiac killers are in my handwriting. I actually know my father is the Zodiac killer. I was there, and I was there when he did away with that poor taxi driver, so it's not like something I think. I know it. I was there, and this guy, Jay Foy, he's poor grandpa who was a police officer. He's just thrown under the bus just to get some attention. And it's so sad. He has no idea. He just one day discovered that some people had suspected him at one time because the Zodiac put little clues and tried to make people think that it was him. My father told me he was trying to set up somebody, and it was a cop that was there, and it was his grandpa. My father liked to frame people, and it's very possible he knew about it. If there is a DB Cooper, a Daniel Cooper, who worked for that forest where he parachuted out of. I mean, that would be really stupid, don't you think? If you are somebody like this Daniel Cooper who worked for this particular forest, I mean, you'd be just telling everybody who you are if you jumped into that forest and told everybody who your real name was. I mean, wouldn't that be stupid? I mean, you wouldn't do that. I mean, a criminal doesn't do that. I mean, the Zodiac put Dick on a letter trying to hint that it was Richard, whatever the guy's name is, that is this J Foy's grandpa. But do you honestly think that somebody who wants to get away with crimes like this would ever put their name anywhere? I mean, come on. They would have gotten caught if they had done something like that. Nothing matched up, and they were trying to divert everyone's attention away from themselves by pointing at somebody and hoping it would take off, and it never did, because a criminal doesn't do that. If you want to get away with your crime, you're not going to like hint at who you are and what your name is and jump into the forest you work for. I mean, that would be really stupid. Yeah, but he didn't smoke. My father didn't smoke, but he would have smoked for an assignment. He would have done that if he had known this DB Cooper, who he's saying worked for that forest and was a U.S. veteran, military veteran. If he knew that, it would have been easy for him. I tried smoking cigarettes when I was a young person. I could have just, I mean, as an adult today, I could just smoke cigarettes in front of someone if I wanted to fool people into thinking I smoked. I don't smoke. So I could see how my father would have done that to throw people off. But he didn't smoke. In real life, he did not smoke. But that's really interesting, this person. Okay, I'm going to watch this now. I'll get back to you and let you know what I think. Okay, so this is the trailer. It's the introduction. That's what I saw. So I'm going to play the introduction. And okay. That was pretty interesting. They were really focused on a certain guy named Sheridan Peterson being DB Cooper in this particular episode. Of course, I know who it isn't him, but this guy Sheridan, he looked very much like the sketch that they made of DB Cooper, the original sketch. He looks just like that sketch and everything. So I can understand why some people were so convinced. He actually was a skydiver, and he actually handled those same parachutes that were used for DB Cooper. I guess they were from the same place where he worked and everything. He actually daisy chained one of the parachutes himself with his own hands and put the X on there, a red X or something, because he worked there and he could identify it. He knew that was the only parachute that was identifiable in that way, and he knew that was one of the parachutes that DB Cooper used. But he always claimed he wasn't DB Cooper himself, but everybody thought he was. Even one of the FBI agents, she was retired at this point, who was interviewing him. I don't know if she was always retired when she interviewed him, but her name was Mary Jean Fryer. She became convinced it was him too. But they had the clip-on tie that DB Cooper wore. And, my father never wore clip-on ties, ever. I don't know where he got this clip-on tie. It had titanium on it, which indicates someone working around airplanes. Titanium at that time in 1971 was a rare thing to find on anyone's clothing, and it indicated that someone was working around airplanes. My father, as far as I know, wasn't around airplanes very much, other than to fly occasionally. So I wonder if he got this tie somewhere from the airport, and just used it. That's what I was thinking. But they vacuumed this clip-on tie and got all the titanium things on it, but they also got all the DNA off of it. And the investigator who's been investigating now, I don't know what year this particular documentary, this episode was created. Let me just quickly check that information. December 2019. Okay. Yeah, that's when Sheridan was still alive. Sheridan Peterson. It's so funny because this Sheridan Peterson, who lived in Santa Rosa when they interviewed him last, My aunt, she's divorced from my Uncle Norm. She'll always be my aunt because I grew up with her, and she is the mother of my cousin Colin. Her maiden name is Peterson, and I think she always kept her maiden name, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, she always kept her maiden name Peterson. And I think that's really interesting. I almost wonder if they sketched it to look like this guy with that in mind, that my father's sister-in-law, her last name was Peterson. I think she grew up in the Utah area, kind of that area of the country. I don't know if it was in Utah, but in that vicinity of the country, near Salt Lake City, Utah. She ended up living halfway between Salt Lake City and Las Vegas. So it might have been Nevada where she lived or grew up. That's where I believe she was from. Anyway, Christine is her first name. Okay, December 2019. So yeah, at this time in the documentary, Sheridan Peterson is quite old and elderly. He's probably passed away by now. Let's look that up. So let's see if he's passed away. I'm sure he has because he was very old at that time. Yeah, he died. It said charming DB Cooper suspect Sheridan Peterson dies. But when they evaluated the DNA, that actually completely cleared him. They weren't FBI. These were investigators, independent investigators outside of law enforcement that did this, but it was all documented and everything's on camera. And he was cleared, when they found out that the DNA didn't, to their surprise, they got even though it had been so many years at the time, it had been 48 years when they filmed this. Boy, he looks so much like, here, I'm going to share my screen. Look at how much they look alike. I mean, it's like somebody drew this to look like him. Doesn't it look like that? Again, I told you that my father, Dennis Wayne Elliott, signed a contract with the government. He could never be prosecuted for anything. And that's why he became the Zodiac Killer. And that's why he did this as well. He knew he wouldn't be caught. And it just seems to me that they intentionally sketched this to resemble Sheridan Peterson, who was in that industry, who would have had access to parachutes and things like that. And he actually worked for Boeing right after his second wife. And what do you know? His first wife was named Claire, like I'm named Claire. And they interviewed her in the documentary, and she really was wondering if it was him too. He said a lot of people thought it was him, and it just seems like that was intentional. Okay. And when the FBI did a search on the ground for anything related for his parachutes, everything that DB Cooper would have left on the ground or any clues or anything, they were searching 8 miles east of where they should have. And that was intentional too, because they didn't want to find anything because they couldn't prosecute my father. So they looked in a different place nearby and made it seem like they had done their search. And so this is why this investigator, Eric Eulis, he had been investigating this for 12 years up until, they filmed this in December 2019. So he was a real expert about this, and he connected with other experts, a guy who had been given the DNA at the tie, specifically, and they had vacuumed the tie with some kind of micro vac, and he didn't want to open it until he was sure we had the technology to properly evaluate it and get whatever profile we could. It was really remarkable. All of them thought it was really remarkable that they got a full DNA profile of one man. And I don't know, would it be my father? Because my father did not work in an airport. I can see how he might have nabbed a tie somewhere at an airport, or maybe he had access to things like that. I don't know. He never wore clip-on ties ever, and it wasn't his tie. I never saw him with a clip-on. I don't believe so. He always did his tie traditionally. He always had traditional ties. Now, did he ever have a clip-on in his closet? I just don't remember if he did. He might have, but I just don't remember specifically an event when he did. And I might, maybe I'll eventually remember something like that. But he always had a traditional tie. That was my father. He was very traditional. He wouldn't have a need for a clip-on. It would be kind of a joke if he had a clip-on anywhere. And why would he have titanium all over it? Because he never worked in an airport around airplanes. So I'm just thinking it's somebody else's tie. And he obviously handled it, so his DNA would be on it if he put it on himself. But I would think there would be another person's DNA on it if he just grabbed the tie from somewhere. But it said exactly one male. Like they could have gotten a partial DNA profile from somebody else, but it was exactly one full DNA profile from one man. And I have to think that it was my father's DNA profile. And, if anyone wants to test my DNA, and he has other children too, if anyone doubts his parentage with me, he has other children too. So you can test all our DNAs against his and against the profile, the full DNA profile you have. And I think it'll match my dad. But, the FBI already knows this. It's not like they don't. It's just that they had a contract and they can't break the contract. I think even in death, he's dead, and I have the ability to speak freely, and so that's what I'm doing. It was very interesting, and I could see how into it they were and how they were so sure it was Sheridan. I mean, I can understand looking at that sketch. You definitely think it was him. There's a photo of him at that time in a suit with a similar tie. It's funny. He kept claiming it wasn't him, but yes, he'd be their only suspect. He knew it. Their most likely suspect, he said. He always said that about himself, but he never claimed to be. And I could see Mary Jean questioning him and talking about it a certain way. She said, well, it was very brave of him, D.B. Cooper, and she was trying to flatter him. She was hoping for him to confess, but he didn't do it, so he wasn't going to confess, and she was disappointed, but she really wanted to believe it was him, and she was surprised when it wasn't, when the DNA didn't match. She had encouraged him to send in his forms to get his DNA back because she couldn't get it. They had a partial or some kind of profile of his in possession, and she couldn't get it, but he could if he filled out the forms, and she kind of wanted to know if his DNA matched something that they had of DB Cooper, and all he had to do was send in the forms, and he said he would, but then he changed his mind, and that seemed suspicious to her. And so I'm glad they cleared it up before he died. Sheridan Peterson, who has the same last name as my aunt, and Sheridan, that's the name of somebody I personally know. That's her married name, but in 1971 I didn't have any connection to her, and she wasn't married at that time. But it's just really interesting, all the little coincidences here. I'm just glad that Sheridan, they found out that it wasn't him before he died. His family knows, everybody knows. My father is dead, but he doesn't need to be alive for this to be properly processed. Now that I can remember everything, or at least what I was meant to remember. I know my father was a little upset that I told my mother, and like I said, I don't keep secrets like that. I guess Sheridan smoked, I don't know. But we saw those comments of somebody saying there really was a Dan Cooper and that he knew the wife. We saw that on the webpage, and that there really was a Dan Cooper, and he worked in that forest, and he was married to a woman this guy worked for, and his name was Dan Cooper. So that's really the thing that struck me the most. Yeah, he had a pocket knife. He would have had to be able to have cut the parachute if he got caught in the trees, which would have been most likely if he jumped into the woods like he did. There was a railroad track right near where he jumped, and it led to Tina Bar, where they found the ransom money. And I guess it was in 1980 when they found the ransom money, and it was kind of deteriorated by that point, and it appeared to have been buried on the shore of the river there, and it was not washed up. It looked like it was buried intentionally. And I just think that my father, if he left any money behind, he would have gone back to get it, but maybe he was worried that they'd track him down, and maybe the 100,000 was good enough. I don't know. I just know my father would have wanted all that money, and he would have been really disappointed if to leave any behind. I can't believe he didn't go back and get it. It doesn't seem like my father to leave it behind. There were indications that he was a skydiver, somebody who, the way he handled the parachutes and everything showed that he had training, and that would have been part of his CIA training probably. I guess that's what they train you with many times in the CIA. So I just think it's so funny that his first wife was named Claire. Let's see, what else really struck me? What they did was they compared the DNA. He never sent in his own DNA. I think he was a little scared. he actually physically handled the same parachutes that were sent for DB Cooper to use. I guess he was thinking maybe his DNA could be on those parachutes since he actually handled them and he could be falsely implicated when he didn't do it. I think that's why at the end he chickened out of sending his DNA to see if it was a match, to get it released to see if it was a match. I think that's why he chickened out of doing that. But so what they had to do was go around him, and Claire Peterson, his first wife, arranged for one of their children to submit their DNA to see if it was a match, and it did not match up. And that's how they know he's not DB Cooper, just like he said he wasn't. But now they have a full DNA profile as the result. And they were very excited about that at the end, but we don't know what came of that. They didn't do another episode about it. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that stands out here that I haven't mentioned. I guess he jumped into a refuge. It was in Washington State. It was outside Portland. They were almost to Portland, but it was actually in Washington State. I think it was Southwest Washington State. It was a refuge, a wildlife refuge, and they went and they searched everything right near the BNSF railroad tracks. So that would mean that it was right outside Portland, but I would think it would be risky for him to go to the Portland area. I explained how my father probably parked his rental car somewhere in that vicinity and planned to jump out when he did. They said that he had trouble. I guess he had instructed them to leave all the landing gear down. He didn't tell them, but I guess what happened was he opened the stairs, the exit stairs, and that's how he was going to jump out. They couldn't make it to Mexico City with all the landing gear down, so they were diverting to Reno is what they were doing. And as a result, nobody really knew what flight path they were, but they talked with someone who was in the air control center and they know what path they were taking, and that's how they can figure out that the FBI was a little too far east in their search, and so they kind of know. And then they found the ransom money, what remained of it, near that other place that was near the railroad track on the shore of the river there. I guess there are some towns, there's a town, a community somewhere. And I do believe that my father had his car parked somewhere in that area. And when he was panicking, though, I heard that he was upset when the stairs weren't coming down like they were supposed to. And he finally got them down and jumped pretty much where he planned to jump. But I bet you he was panicking because he wasn't getting those stairs to cooperate. And that would ruin his whole plan if he jumped out at the wrong place. But I guess it was pretty much on target. I'm really thinking, though, I can't believe he would bury the money and just leave it behind. Maybe he was worried they'd catch him if he came back. Maybe he did bury it and think, okay, I'll come and get it. I'll come back and get it. But there was too many people searching around in the area. What, Dean?
They use the print money as an odor. Dog and smell. Buried 5 feet deep, the dog is still felt.
Right. Well, this money was not buried very deeply, and it was a kid. It was an 8-year-old kid who found some pieces of money on the shore of this river, and I guess he contacted the authorities, and it ended up to be the ransom money. And what remained of it was deteriorated because it was just buried. Right. I don't think it was inside of anything.
And the bugs would eat the money up.
Yeah, it was deteriorated, but I mean, it was still intact. I mean, it had the original rubber bands and things on it. I know in a hurry he'd have to do something like that. Yeah, and I guess it makes sense that he was concerned he'd be caught if he went back. So he just left it.
I will get one for UPS. The biggest box you got was all stuff in box and made it to my house.
He didn't have time, Dean.
Yes, he did.
He jumped in the middle of the night, and then he had to get to the car. I mean, of course, he can't get caught, right? But he can't be stupid either because he has to get away with it. He's going to get away with it no matter what, but he has to make it easy for himself. If he's over there right by the search parties, they could discover him or something. I guess maybe he didn't think it was worth it to risk that. Maybe the FBI told him not to go back. Maybe that's what it was. They knew what he had done. They said, no, you're not going back. You're going to leave that right there. Because he would have wanted to get it. I know he would have.
Army dogs could smell.
Right. They would smell his smell. Right. And
smell
right. And right. So, well, not that they'd be able to track him down with smell because he wouldn't be in the area. Well, anyway, I bet you it was. To be honest,
the money, Claire.
Dean, now that I think about it, I vaguely remember something like that because that's the only explanation. Like they told him, no, you better not. They knew, the FBI knew, and they warned him, no, you do that. No, we're going to let you slide. Of course, we're going to abide by the contract. But if you go back there, all deals are off. Right. I'm sure because I know my father, he would never have left $100,000 buried. He wanted to go back. He buried it so he could come back and get it. But the FBI said, oh, we know what you did. If you go back, all deals are off. That's what happened. He would have wanted to get, he would never have left $100,000
in a goddamn Mexican jail. We get fed twice a week.
Yeah. I vaguely remember something like that. And I don't know where or how I heard about it. I think it must have been, okay, I'm trying to think. It probably was in Old Greenwich. Yeah, it was like when I got to Old Greenwich, it was, what year was it? Was it 73? I think so. It was in the middle of my first grade year that I moved to Old Greenwich. It was right after we lived in Lexington. We lived in Lexington from 1971 to end of 72. And then, beginning of 73, I was in Old Greenwich, Connecticut. So it was not even 2 years later. A year and a half, and I was informed of a lot of stuff about my father at that time. So a couple of years after that, I was informed a lot. I was given a lot of information. I bet that's when they told me about it, and it just seems familiar. Yeah. Huh. Okay, so this was very interesting. So this is not the most recent documentary about this. I found so many documentaries and movies. The one on Netflix, let's see, I don't see it. Do I see it up here? This was on Tubi. Okay, and I had a hard time finding this. Like I said, I had to put in the name of the series to find it. It was not searchable, even though everybody said it was searchable. But the one on Netflix, I bet you the one on Netflix is a lot newer and probably it covers like 4 episodes, so it's probably more thorough, and I'm gonna have to go through that one.
That's almost 40 hours.
Yeah, I know, right? Almost.
Hey, you put a lot of information out in 40 hours.
I think it's the most recent. Let me see. Netflix. It was released in 2022. So the one I just saw was 2019. It was filmed in 2019, probably released in 2020. And wow, because the guy Sheridan, he was wearing it said I miss Obama on his hat, and there was the year 2020 was on his shirt. On July 13th, 2022. Oh my gosh. The Netflix documentary series DB Cooper, Where Are You? Was released on July 13th, 2022. You know what day that was? July 13th? That was my father, Dennis Wayne Elliott's birthday. Yeah. So somebody knows he's DB Cooper.
That was his birthday thing.
Yeah, no, they know of course they know. Well, if I was informed about it in the mid 70s, they knew back then. They knew it right away. And that's why they were searching in, too far east. They were just looking like they were searching, but they knew it wasn't the right place. And I'd like to know more recent information. I'd like to know the latest. Anyway, I'm glad that I went through this. But yes, I mean, Netflix, okay, okay, that's the next documentary I'm watching. And I'll document my reaction and talk more there. How interesting on my father's birthday. Okay, and then there's others. Okay, so then there's the 2020 documentary, The Mystery of DB Cooper. And then there's the 1981 fictional film, The Pursuit of DB Cooper, and the 2022 docu-style movie, I Am DB Cooper. Yeah, The Mystery of DB Cooper, that's on HBO Max. That's another one. And that one was, that's 2020. That's right around the same time as the one I just watched. It's just maybe a little after. 2009 National Geographic special and a 2018 TV series, DB Cooper, The Real Story. Yeah, this one wasn't even mentioned in any of these. Where Are You? That's the Netflix ones. The Mystery of DB Cooper, that's HBO Max. I Am DB Cooper, that's a film. That's a movie. And that was in 2022. The Skyjacker That Got Away, that's 2009 National Geographic. DB Cooper, The Real Story, TV series. Okay, The Pursuit of DB Cooper, that's 1981. Without a Paddle, and it's a comedy film where 3 friends go on a campy trip to find DB Cooper's treasure, 2004. That's funny. All right, so yeah, I've got a lot more to watch. Okay, let's watch the trailer for the Netflix one. Oh, and they have I Am DB Cooper trailer. Let's do this one. Where Are You? This is the next... July 13th, my father's birthday. That is so wild. The FBI people in my life, you know, in my childhood and now, not that I have direct contact with them now, we're all filmmakers too. We co-write scripts, we co-produce movies, films, TV shows. They had a hand in this Netflix one if it was released on my father's birthday, of course. Of course. So it's the next one we're going to watch. It was just that Laurence Fishburne that made me go to this one first. This one was hard to find and it's not one of the major ones, but I had to do this one first because it was because of Laurence Fishburne that I finally really examined the possibility that DB Cooper could be my father on 9/11, and thank goodness I did, or I wouldn't be able to tell you what I've told you today. Let's look at the other trailer really quick before we go. Okay, here's the other one. Where are you? That was that one. And this is I Am DB Cooper, true crime documentary. I guess this is a movie. That looks interesting. Oh, this is the HBO one. Let's look at this one. Here we go. This is the one. See, there's so many other people who look more like him than my father did. You know, the sketch, the original sketch anyway. The FBI sketch looks more like my father. Just want to make sure we've watched all the trailers. Okay, let's watch. Okay, lots of documentaries. All right, I guess that'll do it for now. All right, well, I look forward to watching those others, and I will film my reaction. And I hope that my story helps to make this public, so it's no longer a mystery. And the same for the Zodiac Killer. This is the latest thing I've remembered. Okay, I'm still remembering. I don't remember everything. And it took a whole lot to trigger this because on the surface, it didn't seem like it was my father. I had to open my mind to the possibility that it must be my father if Laurence Fishburne is the host introducing it. And boy, did Laurence Fishburne make it so dramatic. It just captured my attention and caused me to look deeper. And thank you, Laurence Fishburne. I wouldn't have ever been able to do it without you. Okay. I almost want to cry. Thank you, Laurence Fishburne. For more content, give me a thumbs up. Tell the algorithm that you like me, please. And if you can handle the truth, please subscribe to my channel. I have a lot of truth to give and offer if you want to consume it. So please subscribe if you haven't. And thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Over and out. Peace out.
Thank you.